Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the C40 workshop, Leadership Breakfast. I would first like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting this morning on the traditional land of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders both past and present. I would also like to acknowledge the Honourable Jeanette Powell, MP, Minister for Local Government and Aboriginal Affairs, Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Robert Doyle, Jan Gehl, Gehl Architects, bit of a rock star last night at Melbourne Conversations. Good morning and welcome to Zinc for our C40 Leadership Breakfast. My name is Councillor Cathy Oak. I'm from the City of Melbourne, and it's my pleasure to be your MC today. Today marks an official close to what has been an exciting and at times hectic, exhausting past couple of days, but it has been incredibly rewarding for all of us who have been involved and spent the last few days down at Docklands. And I said it last night at Melbourne Conversations, but Docklands really did put on a show for us the last few days. It was beautiful weather down there and not any wind whatsoever, and it was a beautiful space to be. The C40 workshop, and you'll hear a lot more about this morning, but has brought together 17 cities from around the globe to Melbourne to collaborate, plan and deliver sustainable communities, not just now but into the future. And this morning brings together some closure for the week's activities. We'll hear from a range of guest speakers representing federal and local government as well as from C40. There's some important announcements to make. It's always good at the end of a few days of hard work to have some important announcements, and they're pretty exciting, so we look forward to those shortly. The breakfast will conclude with a panel discussion framed around global perspectives on sustainable urban development. The 5-person panel will consider the role of city governments and groups like C40, highlighting leading examples and reflecting on their workshop experiences. But without further delay, it's now time to hear from the first of our guest speakers. Blair Comley, PSM, is Secretary of the Department of Climate Change and Energy Efficiency, the agency responsible for spearheading Clear Energy Futures package, including the carbon price to be introduced in July next year. Please make him welcome.
Thank you. I too would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. I've been asked to talk about the Clean Energy Future package, and one thing that you need to pause on this is that we have an implementation unit that tracks the Clean Energy Future package. There are around 50 separate measures that make up the Clean Energy Future package. You don't hear about all of them because it tends to get drowned out by one that's moderately prominent and controversial, which is the carbon price. So I will talk a little bit about the carbon price, but I want to touch on some of the other measures that may have got less publicity but feed directly into this space of sustainable communities. But on the carbon price, it's interesting, there's been a lot of talk over many years of a carbon price. We're about to approach a very important milestone. On Monday next week, the regulator that will administer the carbon price will be formally established. It comes into effect. The CEO of that regulator was announced recently as Ms. Chloe Munro. And so from Monday, we again keep moving through that progress of sort of an idea to implementation, and the regulator will be established. On the 1st of July, parties who are the largest emitters of carbon pollution will be liable under the scheme, and the scheme will roll through for 3 years under a fixed price arrangement before going to an internationally linked cap and trade system. So the momentum really is rolling through on a carbon price, and there's a lot talked about what's in a carbon price, but in essence it's very simple. We require liable parties, those that have a significant amount of emissions, to record and report their emissions. In fact, we've been asking roughly the same group of companies to report their emissions for the last 3 years under the National Greenhouse Energy Reporting Scheme. At the end of each year, they have to put into the regulator the amount of emissions that they've put into the atmosphere, and then there will be a charge in the fixed price period, a known charge, for every tonne they put into the atmosphere. Then there will be auditing mechanisms and other mechanisms to ensure that those liable entities actually comply with their obligations. Now, because the way in which carbon pollution gets in the atmosphere, there's actually not that many pathways in the economy and how they get into the atmosphere. By covering around 500 corporations, you will cover around 70% of the emissions that go into the atmosphere in Australia. And then simply, the idea is that putting pollution into the atmosphere is like any other cost of business. It's something that has an implication for business, and therefore they will have to have incentives to change their behaviour. Experience with other environmental schemes set up in this way is that typically the amount of emissions reductions you get after you put a scheme in are significantly higher than you first imagined. And that's essentially because you unlock the ingenuity within each business throughout the economy who has a very strong incentive to go and find ways to do things better, to do it more efficiently. So history tends to suggest you outperform the emissions reductions targets that you have in mind. So there's a lot of talk about carbon pricing, and a lot of it is because we start talking about the minutiae on the edges of a policy or how to transitional arrangements, but that's the simple idea. If you want to encourage people to use something more efficiently, you need to have consequences of using products and doing activities that create pollution. So that's the centrepiece of the Clean Energy Future Package, but there are many other elements. And I just want to pick up 5 other elements that are both in the Clean Energy Future Package or enhanced by it. The first is the Community Energy Efficiency Program, which will provide $200 million in co-funding to local government and community organisations to improve the energy efficiency of community buildings, facilities and lighting. These grants will allow communities to both improve and demonstrate the way they use energy and achieve real energy savings. The second is the Low Income Energy Efficiency Program, which will provide $100 million in funding to consortia of local government, businesses and not-for-profit organisations to trial and demonstrate the best ways of helping low-income households be smarter with their energy. Low-income households are members of our communities who are at least able to respond to rising energy prices and are often unable to make the necessary changes. This program will assist the most vulnerable to implement energy-efficient solutions and better manage their energy bills. The third is the Energy Efficiency Information Grants Program, providing $40 million of funding to industry associations and not-for-profit organisations to provide practical, tailored advice to small and medium businesses and community organisations about how to increase their energy efficiency. Small and medium businesses and community organisations often don't have the time to research energy efficiency measures or access information about specific steps they can take to make smarter energy choices. This program is designed to address these problems. Now, the first round of applications for these programs have actually finished, and we're assessing the applications now, and we've been somewhat overwhelmed by the number of applications under these programs. I actually think that's not unrelated to the fact that they're nested within the CEF package overall. In the past, when governments have set up programs like this, they've actually often had trouble getting money out the door. They've often been undersubscribed. And I think this is part of the cumulative effect of the publicity that comes with people focusing on the need to reduce emissions and it being moderately controversial at times, that you've got a much larger uptake that you've had in the past. Part of that is the general publicity, and part of it is a sense that we are moving to a new world where people are going to have to take account of the actions they're taking, and there'll be financial consequences of that. So I think they nest together. The other 2 programs I wanted to mention are programs that have, one of them pre-existed the CEF package, but not by long, and that was the government's carbon farming initiative. This allows farmers and land managers to earn carbon credits by storing carbon or reducing greenhouse gas emissions on the land. In particular, landfill operators, many of which are local governments, can earn carbon credits by undertaking approved activities that reduce emissions from legacy waste, that is, waste deposited before 1 July 2012. For example, by capturing methane or using it to generate renewable electricity. The scheme provides opportunities for local government to earn extra revenue while reducing their emissions. This slightly predated the CEF package, but the fact now those credits are sellable into the carbon price mechanism means that the price that you'd expect to get for those activities is higher than it was previously. So again, it reinforces the overall reduction message. The final program that I wanted to mention, and it's good to see Robert Hill here today, is Low Carbon Australia. It again pre-existed the CEF package, but reinforces the action in the CEF package. The government established Low Carbon Australia as an independent company with over $100 million in initial funding. Low Carbon Australia provides financial solutions and advice to Australian businesses, government and the wider community to encourage action on energy efficiency, cost-effective carbon reduction and accreditation for carbon neutral products and organisations. They help businesses, industry and the public sector organisations to develop, co-design and co-deliver energy efficiency finance solutions to facilitate the transition to a low-carbon economy. Low Carbon Australia also offers financing to businesses, building owners, industry, local councils and other organisations to cover start-up costs to implement investment-ready energy and carbon-saving upgrades. Generally, this financing is designed so the energy savings outstrip the cost in 5 years or less. Repayments are structured to either be the same as or less than the savings made, making it a highly attractive option. In fact, the City of Sydney, which is a member of the C40, signed a Memorandum of Understanding with Low Carbon Australia just a few weeks ago as part of their push to achieve 70% emission cuts by 2030. They are also the first Australian council to be certified as carbon neutral by Low Carbon Australia. Low Carbon Australia is doing very practical things on the ground. It nests within the framework of the CEF package and will consider how it's going to work with a new element of the CEF package, which is a Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which will have $10 billion to invest. Will have $10 billion injected over 5 years. So in a 10-minute presentation, particularly one over breakfast, it's hard to do justice to the breadth of the CEF package. The message I would give is that this is a very integrated package with around 50 measures. The carbon price is at the centre, but those other programs, such as the grants program for energy efficiency, including for local governments, the work in the carbon farming initiative, which is enhanced by having access to the carbon price to sell the credits, and the work of Low Carbon Australia and soon to be the CFC, provide a very holistic approach that provides support to move to lower emissions and a clean energy future. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair, and thank you to the Australian Government for being a partner with our C40 workshop this last few days. I'd also like to thank our other partners. You know, we can't run a 4-day, 3-day international gathering like we have without important partners. So I would like to also thank Lendlease, Places Victoria, City of Sydney, Green Building Council, the World Green Building Council, ICLEI, IBM and GDF Sewers. Thank you very much to all of our partners for supporting C40 the last few days. Before I introduce Amanda Eichel from C40 to tell us more about the last few days and also about the C40 group, we have a message from Mayor Bloomberg. Mayor Michael Bloomberg is the chair of the C40 group and he's provided a message for us this morning, so we'll hear from him first.
Good morning from New York City, or maybe I should be saying good evening. Let me first thank Lord Mayor Doyle and the City of Melbourne for hosting this event. Melbourne has been a vital member of the C40 group, and I want to recognize Mayor Doyle for his participation at a roundtable earlier this month in Chicago, organized by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. I also want to thank everyone who has traveled here to contribute their city's perspectives on the challenges that connect us all, sustainability and the impacts of climate change. This kind of city-to-city exchange is something C40 is strongly committed to. In fact, this workshop is one of the first of its kind. We see this as an opportunity to solve problems, a chance for government, the private sector, and nonprofits to share ideas and take part in a constructive dialogue. At the end of this event, C40 will launch an action-oriented network of cities to meet the needs that are articulated during the course of conversation. And I hope you will continue to engage the C40 staff and your fellow C40 colleagues long afterwards. After all, we've got a lot to learn from one another, and that's exactly what the C40 group aims to encourage. While cities around the world understand that action at the national and international levels is crucial, your presence here today shows that we're not waiting for anyone else to go first. We're the level of government closest to the majority of the world's people. We're directly responsible for their well-being and their futures. So while nations talk, but all too often drag their heels, we're going to act. I hope you enjoy your time in Melbourne and the many wonderful activities your hosts have planned. Good luck and keep up the great work.
And now to hear more about the C40 group, I would like to introduce Amanda Eichel. Amanda is the Director of Program Delivery for C40. The C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group is a network of large and engaged cities from around the world committed to implementing meaningful and sustainable climate-related actions locally that will help address climate change globally. The current chair, as we've heard, is the Mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, and it was great that he was able to provide the video that we've just heard. And now we'll hear from Amanda Eichel to hear more about the network that he mentioned in that video. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you, Councillor Oak, and thank you, Lord Mayor. And on behalf of Mayor Bloomberg, the chair of C40, I also want to say congratulations to the City of Melbourne and all of the delegates from C40 cities who were able to join us. We've had a really productive couple of days of conversations, and I think we're headed towards a really exciting place with this new network that we're getting ready to launch today. So as Councillor Oak said, the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group is a network of 40 cities, 40 megacities plus 18 what we call affiliate cities from around the world who have committed to making meaningful change. C40 was actually created in 2005 by Mayor Ken Livingstone of London, and then expanded in 2006 with a partnership with the Clinton Climate Foundation, which then brought together these two fabulous things, a network of mayors and staff on the ground to really support the work that was happening locally. Why cities is something that's often asked of C40 and the organization. Cities consume over 2/3 of the world's energy and account for over 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. And half of the world's population actually lives in cities. That number will increase to 3/4 by 2050. Cities also account for more than half of global GDP, and cities are vulnerable to climate change with approximately 75% of urban settlements on coastal areas that are vulnerable to flooding and sea level rise. In a recent study that we conducted at C40, we found that while there's all of this impact happening in cities, mayors also have the opportunity to really control and reduce those emissions at the local level. They control transportation and density, waste, energy, supply and demand, and globally these sectors which are controlled by mayors account for over 75% of emissions. So mayors have the direct potential to reduce and cut emissions in their cities. We have also found and strongly believe that cities are uniquely positioned to take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. To date, C40 cities have taken nearly 5,000 individual actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions locally, and another 1,500 are planned or in progress. Given the great potential for cities to make a serious impact in climate change, we've developed at C40 a tailored service delivery approach that we find best supports these cities to continue to implement significant changes in policies and programs aimed at greenhouse gas emissions. So what we offer is really a three-pronged approach through C40. Direct assistance to cities through embedded local staff, what we call city directors that are in city halls who support their local governments with, and in addition, bringing technical expertise through a field staff and key partnerships. That result in pragmatic, measurable, scalable projects and programs to inform city policy. We're also implementing a regional model, which will be taking place this year to really bring more of a regional feel and an international feel to the staff that supports the C40 cities. Over the past year, we've also announced key partnerships with organizations like the World Bank and Eichel. And right now we're working closely with the World Green Building Council and other private sector partners to bring together the technical expertise and support of industry to really support cities in this mission, in this common mission. We also have a research and knowledge management agenda that allows us to stay nimble and progressive and really respond directly to the priorities that cities have identified. We do this again through important partnerships like one with Eichel, where we're developing a common standard for how communities measure their greenhouse gas emissions. Hard to believe, but there's still 20 different ways that cities are accounting for their emissions. So having a common language and a common standard allows us to then identify common opportunities. We're also in the progress of developing a web-based knowledge platform. So bringing all of this incredible knowledge that's both within city governments as well as the work that we're doing through these networks into one place. And over the past few days, we heard over and over again how important that really is to providing access to what's happening on the ground in cities. And the final component of our service delivery approach is offering peer-to-peer exchange through a series of action-based networks, bringing together cities that are facing common challenges, but also those cities who have common power structures and control, through both face-to-face workshops like the one that we are just wrapping up today, as well as virtual events to really increase the communications between cities. Over the past few days, we had 17 cities, C40 cities, gathered in collaboration. And what we have found in those cities is that, and what we see worldwide, is that sustainability, economic growth, and social growth are both desirable, necessary, and complementary objectives. And so we're pleased to announce today the creation of a brand new network that's dedicated to sustainable urban development, focused on opportunities at the neighborhood and precinct scale. This network will be an ongoing forum for C40 cities to work together and capitalize on each other's experiences, expertise, and resources. And I'm very pleased to also announce that the City of Melbourne, under the leadership of the Lord Mayor, will lead this network, acting as both champion and catalyst to the important work in this critical area of influence for all C40 cities. All C40 cities will be eligible to participate in the network, and it will communicate in regular meetings. And as part of our work over the last 2 days, we are developing the beginnings of an action plan, working collaboratively with both cities, business leaders, development partners, and other non-governmental organizations to identify how C40 can best provide support to the efforts of this extraordinary group of cities. Having Melbourne lead this C40 network will enable others to learn from what is happening locally, as well as the challenges that you're still working to overcome. The City of Melbourne was recently awarded the 2012 Visionary Award from Energy Efficiency Global in recognition of energy efficiency leadership through the 1200 Buildings program. This program shows fantastic global leadership to improve the sustainability of existing buildings within the city. The leadership that Melbourne has accepted for the C40's newest network, focused on sustainable urban development, shows that the city is not only committed to the individual building, but moving beyond that to create sustainable, livable communities at the neighborhood and precinct scale. This network will facilitate city-to-city exchange, and it's something that C40 is very strongly committed to. So finally, thanks again to Lord Mayor Doyle, the City of Melbourne, and all the C40 cities represented today for their shared mission, willingness to accept leadership and responsibility, and the commitment to pragmatic, measurable, scalable efforts on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you to all of the C40 staff that have been with us for the last few days. It has been a great collaboration between the City of Melbourne and C40 and our other partners, and it has been a great few days of discussion, and not only through the panels and the speakers and the case studies such as Paulo, we have heard many great examples of what cities are doing just over the lunch breaks, and having that opportunity in Melbourne has been excellent. But I didn't want to let pass the announcement of that Visionary Award, and I'm sure that the Lord Mayor will be talking about it perhaps on the panel, but I think that the recognition that the city has received on the global level for our 1200 Buildings program is something that, even though I am from the City of Melbourne, I think we should call for a round of applause for everyone that has been involved in the 1200 Building program. And yes, it's very exciting to be recognised in that way. And also, I really look forward to hearing more about the role that the Lord Mayor and the City of Melbourne will play as chairing this new network that Amanda has just announced, and that will be very exciting for the city and our other partners as well. But now it's time for the panel discussion. So I'm going to introduce our chair, Romilly Madew, if you'd like to come to the stage. She's very well known to many of us as the CEO of the Green Building of Australia, the newly appointed board member of the World Green Building Council, as well as the chair of their International Ratings Tool Task Group. Romilly is also the chair of the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council Cities Task Group, which I just said then. But please welcome Romilly, who will introduce the rest of our panel in today's proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. Today the panel will be discussing global perspectives on sustainable urban development. So it's very apt, and I congratulate Melbourne for chairing the new initiative, the Sustainable Urban Development Network. As has been mentioned, C40 Cities has been holding a workshop this week on sustainable communities focusing on collaborating, planning and delivering. This is a significant event, and I actually think one of its, the first of its kind from C40, and congratulations to the Lord Mayor for initiating this event in São Paulo last year. The City of Melbourne has really taken a leadership position, working with the 17 cities who attended this week to learn and share with each other about making our cities great places to live, work and play. Amanda has already spoken about why focus on cities, but it's worth reflecting this. The United Nations forecasts that today's urban population of 3.2 billion will rise to nearly 5 billion by 2030. By then, 3 out of 5 people will live in cities, and the world will no longer be a global village, but a global city. In Australia, one of the most urbanised nations, 4 out of every 5 people will live in Sydney. I've been trying to be really good about Melbourne and Sydney. Kathy, you can tweet me later. 4 out of every 5 people will be living in cities by 2050. Creating productive cities that are livable and sustainable is our greatest challenge. The Green Building Council model was established to encourage all sectors of our industry, from developers to financiers, designers and builders, to walk alongside government to improve the social, economic and environmental performance of our buildings, communities and cities. This model has been highly successful. Today we have 90 Green Building Councils around the world. Green Building Councils have established a common language for green building, built capacity through peer-to-peer education and shared practical experience through case studies and advocated the importance of green building to government. World Green Building members combined have over 700 staff, represent over 22,000 organisational members, with over 100,000 registered green buildings. So in Australia that's Green Star, in the United States LEED, in the UK BREEAM, and there's about 50 other rating tools out there. But 100,000 registered, not certified, registered buildings. That's over 1 billion square metres of registered green buildings in the world. Around the world, the green building movement is greening our cities, building by building. So it makes sense then that the World Green Building Council and C40s are establishing a partnership to create a network for cities, just using the Green Building Council's unique property and industry network. In Australia, we have shifted our focus from greening our buildings to greening our communities and cities. Through support of organisations and cities like the City of Melbourne and Lendlease, who are one of the sponsors, the Green Building Council of Australia is preparing to launch Green Star Communities, our rating tool for communities, in mid-2012. Green Star Communities is an independent, transparent, national scheme able to assess and certify the sustainability of community-level development projects. Today we are going to learn about some other achievements at the city level from an expert panel. And there was a Melbourne conversation last night, so I'm hoping it'll just be as jolly as last night's was. You will get an understanding of the discussion and debates over the course of the week and where we go from here. So I would now like to introduce our panel members. If you look on the table, there is actually more detailed information on each panel member. So please join with me in welcoming the Right Honourable Robert Doyle, Lord Mayor of Melbourne, if the panel members can come up. Professor Gehl. Jan is from Gehl Architects and is the retired Professor of Urban Design at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts in Copenhagen. And if you haven't heard from Jan before, you'll be wanting to book a flight to Copenhagen after you hear from him today.
Thank you, that was beautiful.
Brian Crowe is the Director of Water, Sewers and District Energy for the City of Vancouver. And Professor Oswaldo Massambani is a Professor of Atmospheric Sciences at the University of São Paulo, as well as Senior Environmental Advisor for the Urban Development Secretary of São Paulo City. And Amanda, you have already met and heard from. So welcome, please join me in welcoming the panel. Now it's apt, and I'm just going to put it in context about why I'm asking as Oswaldo the first question. The reason I say it's apt is because of this. Next Monday, the Council of Australian Governments will be releasing the Capital City Strategic Planning document that came from the COAG Reform Council. So this looks at the planning of our capital cities in Australia. The National Urban Forum, which a couple of people in the room were on, held its meeting with Minister Albanese a number of weeks ago. So just putting cities into the federal context and thinking about what Mayor Bloomberg said about how cities are really the ones closest on the ground to communities, why then would federal governments be involved in cities? So, Oswaldo, could you please tell us about the involvement of your federal government in relation to cities, as well as I understand that there's a Council for Climate Change as well?
Well, good morning, everyone. I would like to thank the Lord Mayor for the opportunity to be here in this so important moment of the C40 Sustainable Community Workshop. Yeah, that's true. You know, Brazil is a country of cities. We are 190 million people in Brazil, and 80% of the Brazilians live in cities. So city is a big issue for Brazil. And it's so important that the government have created the Ministry of the Cities. So the Ministry of Cities now is undertaking under this governance domain, the responsibility for the strategies, for the policies, for the urban programs for the cities, sanitation, for the water and housing as well. So the government is extremely concerned about how to regulate all these facilities and how to stimulate the cities to get more acquainted with the people's difficulties and trying to organize it. So we have constructed under this ministry the statutory of the cities. So there is a national regulation that gives some guidance for the cities to how to handle land use, transport, water, wastewater, and wastes in general. So this has been extremely important for the country, but the cities have been undertaking an important role. And the city of Sao Paulo is leading the country for improvements in quality of life for the Brazilian citizens. And in 2009, the city of Sao Paulo, the Mayor Gilberto Kassab, which is friend of our Lord Mayor here, has sent to the City Council a proposal for a bill to coordinate and to establish the political strategy for mitigation and adaptation to climate change. And this is extremely important because the areas of land use, transportation, energy, housing, and wastes are extremely important. And we are under a situation in which the climate change is stressing the city, the facilities, and our data in Sao Paulo shows that we are increasing the frequency of extreme events of rainfall. And this also brings a lot of stress in the city. So I showed here during the seminar that the sprawling of the development of the city of Sao Paulo have been stressing the natural resources, the water facility, as well as the fragile areas of the ecosystems around the city. So having a city with 11 million of inhabitants, and generating about 17,000 tons of waste pushes the administration to a very responsible kind of activities. So the committee that was created for driving the implementation of this bill is working very hard. And last year, we launched the guidelines for climate change and mitigation for the Sao Paulo action plan for mitigation and adaptation to climate change. So Sao Paulo is showing to the nation that we have to work with the cities, and the city of Sao Paulo is now moving on and is leading the actions for the other cities. We are working together for a working meeting in Rio +20 this year, in a few months, in Rio, to work with the Brazilian capitals to stimulate the cities to copy what C40 is being done and what we are working on, and trying to give a much better life equality to our people.
Thank you. Brian, yesterday we were talking and you made the comment, cities are the economic engines for our nations. So what are the economic development initiatives that Vancouver has been focusing on?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Vancouver has a long history of being a environmentally minded city, and more recently that's, of course, developed into the broader sustainability mindset that we're all working to achieve nowadays. And it's interesting, that has actually become a core piece of our economic development policy, in that the city now has a formal Greenest City Action Plan, which is Council's policy for how to move forward for major improvements in the livability and environmental performance of the city, with a broad set of targets and goals to achieve by 2020, with the lofty challenge to be the greenest city in the world by 2020. And it's a friendly competition, believe me. I mean, I think there are a lot of cities who want to be the greenest city in the world, but the primary reason for that is that it's an economic development strategy. You know, the belief is that to compete in the global market nowadays and to be a place that attracts and retains talent and brings in the kind of business and economic development that we believe is a good fit with Vancouver requires that we be as close as we can be to the greenest city in the world. And it really fits with the environmental mindset and the lifestyles that people want to have in Vancouver. You know, other cities have been tech centers or resource centers, but we believe the direction of the future that will be Vancouver's brand is to be a sustainable green city, and that will bring us the business opportunities and the people who love to live in Vancouver and will stay with us and build the strength of the city.
Thanks, Brian. Jan, one of the things, and I can say that the Building Council is also at fault in here, is over the last 10 years we've really focused on buildings. We've focused on the design of sustainable buildings, building buildings and performance of buildings. We seem to have forgotten about one element, and that is that buildings are for people. And we were having this discussion yesterday. What do you think the focus should be in the coming years? And I know you're very passionate about the fact that we seem to forget about while we're building these buildings and cities.
Yeah, I sometimes make the point that a city can be completely full of green buildings and be a very black city anyway, and not a very good city at all. And I'm focused very much on, now we are gathered to discuss sustainability. But I think that in the very rapid expansion of the cities in the last 50 years, we have lost a lot of knowledge about how to make good habitat for Homo sapiens. And I think that a lot of the new constructed districts in the suburbs, in the city centers, they are not actually very good places for the people who are using them. They are surviving, they are getting around, and they are doing their things. But the quality of the settings are not very good. Sometimes I say that we know actually now more about good habitat for mountain gorillas than we know about habitat for Homo sapiens. And that knowledge has by and large got lost over 50 years. But now we have more and more knowledge. And I think it's important that we realize that making sustainable cities, making more healthy habitats, inviting for healthy lifestyles, making more safe cities, and making more livable cities is actually all compassed if we focus more on making livable cities for people. So all these green cities, green buildings, they can be part of a fantastic habitat. And yesterday I talked to a teacher from Melbourne who talked very enthusiastically about the classes he was giving about the children should make green buildings as a task. And he asked, what can you suggest? I suggest that the next task would be to make green neighborhoods, green communities and green cities. And that will get the kids working on a wider scale and with more perspective for mankind.
Thanks, Jan. Lord Mayor, when you supported this initiative in São Paulo, what was the aims of that you were and the outcomes you were hoping for from the workshop this week?
Thank you. First, I was delighted to hear Brian talk about sustainability and prosperity in the same sentence. I try never to have a sentence with one and not the other in it, and I think that's one of the central messages out of this week, to go partly to your answer. Just yesterday, the COAG Reform Council reported that one of their concerns was that state governments were not working closely enough with the private sector in order to drive great investment in sustainability and prosperity. And I thought how ironic that we've gathered here with major partners like Lend-Lease and our other private sector partners, with levels of government, with city governments from around the world, with the community sector as well, doing exactly what the COAG Reform Council talked about. So could I just exhort you in our messaging to keep sustainability and prosperity in the same sentence every time we talk about this. Secondly, Brian, look, that idea of it being a friendly competition is a veneer. A very, very thin veneer. I know Gregor Robertson, the Mayor of Vancouver, very well. I know Gilberto, the Mayor of Sao Paulo. I know Frank, the Mayor of Copenhagen. It's not a friendly competition. When Melbourne was voted the most livable city in the world, there was a time difference to Vancouver, but I did take the trouble to send Gregor an email just in case he hadn't caught up on the news that Melbourne had overtaken Vancouver for the first time in 10 years. But no, it is one of the point I'm trying to make through that self-serving story is there is a conversation between mayors around the world, and it is a very productive one, from some of the most senior figures like Mike Bloomberg, all the way to mayors of quite small cities, or like in the case of Melbourne and Sydney, mayors who are mayors for the centre of the city and can't speak for the entirety of the metropolis. But there is a very powerful conversation going on. But when I was talking in Sao Paulo about the workshop here, what I really wanted was exactly this. It's not a talk shop, okay? It's a workshop. It was about practical, concrete, specific examples. It was about replicable, scalable, best practices that we can share. And the point I wanted to make, and it was a point I was talking with Mike Bloomberg in Chicago a couple of weeks ago about our hopes for the outcome of this workshop. This sort of work, and the work that we will do with the Sustainable Urban Development Network, that doesn't happen by magic somewhere else. And it doesn't happen in those conversations even between mayors. The real work happens with you guys. You know, you are the ones who have the deep subject matter expertise and the experience of what works in your cities that you can help us to share. As Mike said in his video, it is that important sharing of what we do and working out how we can replicate best practice in our cities that is very important. The other thing I wanted really was to bring all of you together, because I hope you have developed not just friendships, but real networks and conversations of influence and excellence, so that you know now, you know, if you want to know something about how do you create a city of culture and people, you can talk to Gehl and you can talk to Copenhagen. If you want to find out, you know, a city that does, in my view, just about everything extremely well, you can talk to Vancouver, because they are an exemplar. If you want to see one of the most ambitious and remarkable projects about how you turn a problem, you know, thousands and thousands of tons of waste, into a solution, energy, talk to Sao Paulo about what they did and the scale of their ambitions and how they succeeded. So what I wanted, I guess in short, was those practical outcomes that we can use, not just talk about, And secondly, I wanted to develop a conversation between you that was an ongoing one, where you shared that world's best knowledge and expertise and took it back to your cities to use. I have every confidence that that's what this 2 days has delivered, and the success of it is because of all of you and what you've brought to the table. So thank you on behalf of our city.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Amanda a question, but I'm hoping I get questions from the floor in the room. So all my friends like Mark, David Waldron, Stefan, no pressure, Tim, think up a question. Amanda, from the C40's perspective, what does success look like both for this workshop as well as C40 as a whole?
Sure. So I actually think the Lord Mayor actually just talked about what success of this workshop looks like. To me, it's those taking those lessons, that at least one that you've learned from meeting with your colleagues and taking them back home and turning those into real action on the ground. One of the things that we did as soon as Mayor Bloomberg took over as chair of the C40 was to set a baseline of both policy. So that policy baseline that I talked about, 5,000 actions that C40 cities have already taken in the past, so that we understand where we're starting from. And for us, we will measure success by looking at that number increasing over time. How does that compare then with greenhouse gas emission reduction on the ground, reduction of risk in terms of adaptation and resilience of cities? But we're really holding ourselves accountable to real numbers and real data. That's something that Mayor Bloomberg feels very strongly about. And this network is only as valuable as it is in helping cities to actually do things back at home. So we will be measuring the number of policies that increase over time, the real reductions in emissions that result from them, and tracking that both at the network level as well as the organization as a whole. I think one of the things that we can really, one of the values that we can really bring to the cities that are part of the network is helping to track that important progress that's happening as a way of giving meaning to participating in this type of network.
Thank you. Questions from the floor? I'll put pressure on all my mate. Thank you, Mark.
Mark Allen here representing the Property Council. My question to the panel is a reasonably broad one, but we talk a lot about the need for density to drive greater activity and greater economic prosperity and so forth. And we often see that in the centre of our cities, but in many of our suburbs we get quite a backlash from the community who I think equate density with overcrowding. Could you perhaps make some comments, perhaps Jan, about how we try and bring the community with us in terms of trying to see good quality but higher density housing developments in particular, or mixed use?
Yeah, that's quite a question. Yesterday I mentioned that one of the things which has happened is that we as people in the cities, at least in the developed cities, we are spread out more and more and more because our households are smaller and smaller, and the number of square meters per person is wider and wider. So now there's only 15% of the people in a given area today as compared to 100 years ago with the same number of square meters. That means we are scattered enormously. So it's obvious that if we have to have a sustainable and a livable city, we must contract and build more dense housing area, city areas. In a recent book, I was talking about senseless density and sensitive density. We have seen a lot of senseless density, just plonking in towers and say that would be density, but then will be density without livability. We have to develop sensitive density, and that can be done. There are examples. Paris is rather dense, Venice is rather dense, Barcelona is rather dense, and in Vancouver they have some very interesting models of making a fine city and putting the density on top of the fine city instead of letting the towers go right down to the bottom. We will need to make our suburban areas to reshuffle them so they become pearls on a string centered on the public transportation. And actually here in Melbourne, they have one of the most interesting plans in the world about that if they just build moderate density along the rail corridors, they can fit twice as many people here, and they can make the suburbs much better, because that will give suburbs service and closeness to rail and other services. So it's a little bit of a Columbus egg, and Melbourne again is out there in the forefront. Interesting. Sensitive density. We must gather together so we can walk and bicycle and take public transportation.
Lord Mayor and then Brian.
Just let me add to what Jan was saying there. If you don't know the work, it's called Transforming Australian Cities, and we're prepared to provide that for you. We're happy to. It is evidence-driven. As I said the other day, I love Mike Bloomberg's sayings. One of the things he says, he'll pull out a dollar note, a dollar bill, and he'll say, "This is our greenback." And it says on our greenback, "In God we trust." And we do. The rest of you, bring data. and he means it. He means we should be making evidence-driven public policy decisions. Transforming Australian cities is about how you get that sensitive density, you get those extra people in, but you do not compromise the livability of the city that we're so proud of. One other thing I'd add, which is about our city, and we have a number of people in the room who are at the forefront of that. You might not know the statutory authority Places Victoria, which has the responsibility for a lot of our development and opening up land, but we have the chairman, Peter Clark, and the CEO, Sam Sangster, here with us. You know, a great responsibility around how we drive that in the future. But those of you who are not Australian, can I tell you, this is a big challenge for us. What is called the Great Australian Dream is to own your own house, a freestanding house with a front garden and a large backyard in which the children play. And that has been the Australian dream, and it has driven a sprawl of cities like Melbourne over a very large footprint, and that has been the pressure on governments. And I'm delighted, you know, from the Property Council, Mark, even this week, the CEO of the Property Council made a very important speech at the Press Club in Canberra about smart development and dumb development around exactly these ideas. But that attitude is starting to change. The Grattan Institute, a think tank here in Australia, recently did a study of attitudes to housing and density. And think about that great Australian dream. Well, they actually found that a detached house was the 5th most important thing, and a large plot of land the 20th most important thing. So maybe attitudes are starting to change. It's not so important what we live in, but where and how we live. And if attitudes are changing like that, and I hope they are, then we can start to have a conversation with the broader community about saying, yes, we're going to grow, yes, it's going to be sensitive density, but there is nothing to fear in that. In the 1970s, Melbourne was a city of 2 million people. Today, we're a city of 4 million, and we are a more prosperous, more sustainable, more diverse, much more interesting and creative city. It's nothing to fear in that growth and density. But in Jan's words, it has to be that sensitive density, not dumb density.
Thank you. Brian.
I just add briefly that in Vancouver, the model we're trying to develop is that density provides amenity. And that is that the wholest communities, actually the places that are the most attractive to live in Vancouver now and the most highly valued, happen to be the densest, because that density is what brings us the ability to fund the amenity. And by that I mean the high quality public spaces, the facilities and services that people want, the walkability and ability to bicycle on safe routes to nearby things. So the quality of life and the amenity is coming with the density. And it's a very difficult thing to sell to the outlying areas, but we are finally seeing it beginning to appear in some of our slightly more remote new neighborhoods where we're getting acceptance of building more the downtown model on outlying areas of the city. Transit-oriented development is a big piece of it, but the community is starting to realize that it's not just about being on transit. You still want to have a whole community where you live, and we gradually try to teach people that the way you can get the services and facilities you want is to finance them with that density. And it's starting to catch on.
Thank you. Oswaldo.
The compact city approach is very important. So bringing housing, working place, and leisure facilities to the city, so increasing the livability. Now, we have a large problem in Sao Paulo because with the evolution of the city, the sprawling, people left the center of Sao Paulo, which has a lot of infrastructure, so a lots of job places are there, but the people are living outside. So stress on transportation. So we have in Sao Paulo about 3 million people that come early morning to downtown and in the afternoon returning to that area. So bringing working places to housing and leisure facilities, it gives livability. I think that we have to do in a very intelligent way, a smart way to construct this density.
So Peter Verwer, the Chief Executive of the Property Council, spoke at the National Press Club this week, and he released the Property Council have developed a website, and it's called Make My City Work. They worked with Ozpol, and they have surveyed over 5,500 people around what they want in their cities. It's a very interactive website, and it's part of an ongoing conversation by the Property Council of Australia, Green Building Council, Australian Institute of Architects, Planning Institute of Australia and Consult Australia, and as well as ASBEC, on the importance of cities in Australia and making sure that we keep cities on the agenda. So I suggest you look at that website, Make My Cities Work, and join up as a champion of cities. We have a question up here, and then we have a question down here.
Paul James from the United Nations Global Compact Cities Program. I laud the move towards community sustainability as a theme. I think it's one of those important baseline areas of thinking about how we think about the future of this planet. Because going back to the question the Lord Mayor raised about data, the data suggests that for all the information, for all the knowledge that we have about climate change and about sustainability, and for all the good intentions we have as local citizens, resource use keeps going up. Now, simple, straightforward data shows that we care more, we recycle more, we think more about the environment, and our community sustainability desires are wonderful, and yet resource use keeps going up. So my question to the panel is, how do we get beyond just advertising campaigns or postering or brochures which tell people that recycling is good or the sustainability is good, so that people actually think about the nature of their resource use?
I might start, Paul. Look, I think we do have some success stories. I think one of the great success stories here in Australia, and particularly in Victoria, is water. For our international visitors, we have come out of a decade of remarkable drought. At one stage here in the city of Melbourne, people were telling me these beautiful stands of elm trees and plane trees, and the urban forest here was at great risk. Partly because they're coming towards the end of their life, partly because the moisture content of the soil had fallen below 40%. So one of the great treasures of the city was actually at risk. And that was true across all of our state after 10 years of drought. But if you think about the actions we took, okay, we started to build infrastructure that would help us to conserve water. I think the Romilly pipelines and things like that we did, the desalination plants. We had regulation. You know, we actually intervened to say you can't have certain practices like watering your garden with a hose or with a sprinkler system. You can't wash your car with a hose. You can't hose down your footpaths. We prohibited certain behaviours. We also did the stuff you talk about, which by itself, I agree, is not going to work. The education campaign about conservation of water. You know, take shorter showers, use different shower heads, you know, all sorts of things around behaviour and the preciousness of water. We got much smarter in the city about stormwater capture, harvesting, reuse, you know, and reduced our water usage in the city by quite remarkable percentages, I think around 40% with some of the projects we did. And then, typical of Australia's climate, we came out of 10 years of drought and went straight into flood. And you know, it was a remarkable thing, and it shows you what a nation of climatic extreme we are. But the interesting part to me is, when we went from scarcity of resource to abundance of resource, did we go back to our former profligate ways with water? Even though those regulatory restrictions were relaxed, the education campaigns were not as prominent. Well, so far the evidence is, no, we have not gone back to our profligate ways of resource wastage of water. Now, over time, that may alter, I don't know. But it's interesting to me that just that case study around that precious resource has shown some success. I suspect because of the urgency of the question, the preciousness of the resource, and the multifaceted response to a problem that we all recognised. So if that is a case study about how we could go about it, it's not a bad one. We will need the data though now, and it doesn't seem so pressing when you're in flood to think about water conservation. But I would argue that's when you do need data. You do need the evidence to say, have we learned the lessons of our profligacy, and have we changed the way that we use that precious resource? That would be a great case study.
Oswaldo.
Yeah, the question is that our planet is under pressure. And we do have data about this. So in Sao Paulo, we know that our biodiversity in the urban area is being stressed. We have evidences of floods that brings diseases just next day. So leptospirosis is a big issue when just after the floods. And so we have to think of a sustainable development. And thinking of sustainable development, we should address education. I think that's the bottom line, is try to educate, is to bring information to the children, to look into our planet as a limited facility. So we cannot expand as much as we can. We cannot continue to stressing our natural resources. So I think that we do have enough data, we have good cases, and we have to make it very clear to everyone. And the education is a good, important action towards sustainable development.
Thank you. Caroline.
Hello, Caroline Bayliss from the Climate Group. I have also, out of that, many conversations over the workshop, been fascinated to hear some of the experiences and challenges facing our colleagues from cities in developing nations, from Jakarta, from Dakar, from Johannesburg, for example, and would be really interested to hear about the particular strategies for C40 and this new network that's been announced today on sharing experiences between cities from developed nations and developing nations, and how sustainable precincts discussions and neighbourhood discussions can help in the fight to turn informal settlements into sustainable human settlements. Thanks.
So two things. One, I think the way that we're organizing C40 support now is under 7 different initiative areas, and again with these networks really being driven by the cities that are where the priorities are. And one of the things that we heard in conversations yesterday was that within the sustainable communities and the sustainable urban development interest area and priority, there is a real need to bring together a subgroup of developing cities to really share across their experience. So while there is still the benefit in bringing all 17 cities together and sharing what's happening across, there's also a need to refine the focus so that the cities that are doing the most direct exchange have the most similar experiences. So both as we've thought about trying to identify those areas where cities have similar power or authority structure in terms of control of transportation or energy systems, we want to do the same thing in terms of level and extent of experience. So really see a need and an opportunity to support that conversation going forward. I think both at potentially the regional level as well as across. So really looking forward to doing that as well.
Thank you. David Waldron.
Hi, David Waldron from Grocon. Just a quick question, generally for the panel, but maybe one or two if you've got a better perspective than others. I agree absolutely that density brings amenity, and I agree that it's terrific and it's a veneer of a battle around the world's most sustainable city, the best city, the most livable city. But I'm worried, and I'm interested to check in with everybody on the inclusiveness of these sustainable communities. So if we get to incredible amenity through density and we've raised the value, which comes with very livable places, very sustainable places, are we at risk of marginalising further the people that are marginalised already in our cities and have no ability to engage in our cities and live in our cities, and push those people to the periphery for the benefit of those with more income, more funds and more ability to live in these communities?
And I might kick us off. I love the work Grocon does, by the way. I hope you had a chance to have a look at the Pixel building. No economic model would tell you to build Pixel, but it's what Daniel Groho, the CEO, says, well, that's where my business is going to be in 10 years, so I better work out how we're going to do it. So with companies like Lend-Lease and Grocon, I'm very optimistic about our partnerships with the private sector. And that's what I wanted to point out. It sometimes takes positive intervention in order to make sure that you bring those people with you. And let me give you the quick example that I think is a very good model. There is a high school on the edge of the city, 2.5 kilometres from the centre of the city, called Boyd High School. It was no longer needed and closed down as an educational organisation. The city bought that high school site, and it was our intention to retrofit the heritage building, which is a very beautiful school building, as a library, as a community magnet, and have some open space and some community meeting rooms to start to provide that amenity in an area that doesn't have enough of that sort of community infrastructure. But then we looked at how would we pay for that and what would the model be to get some housing onto that. And really we had the power of the tender. And I want to put those, the sustainability, prosperity thing together again. And we went out to tender describing what we wanted. And we had in the end 3 very, very competitive tenders from the private sector. In the end, our partner in that is Mackey, the developers, and they will build quite a tall building. It approaches 100 metres on the edge of that development. But as part of that tender, what they are providing for us is 20% of those apartments, and there'll be about 250 of them, and at the high end, yes, they will be those very high-end expensive apartments. But their commitment as part of that tender is that 20% of those apartments will be for people with disabilities, and they have got 6 community groups as their partners, which our tender required them to do. And so young people with acquired brain injury, sufferers from multiple sclerosis will have access to 20% of those apartments at affordable rates, and 10% of those apartments are set aside for people on very low incomes. And we will, with, again, community partners like Housing Choices Australia, be able to select the clientele that will take up 30% of that building. Now, that wouldn't have happened, to be honest, if you'd left it simply to the profit margin and sector and just said, do your best there. But it was an active intervention by the city to say we want a model that actually builds exactly that into what we want here. And it's a very virtuous circle when you think about it. The city wins. We get a great building which is retrofitted, which provides a community magnet and community infrastructure. The wider community wins. We've got public open space there in an area of high density where we need it. The particular marginalised community that you were talking about wins because there are affordable and purpose-built apartments very close to the city in an area they otherwise wouldn't be able to have. And the economy wins because we get a major construction. That's nearly 300 jobs down on that site at a time when we're all talking about jobs and creating infrastructure. So there are models that work to do it, and I don't think you should be afraid to intervene in order to drive the social as well as the economic outcome that you want. And I hope that that will be a model for the sort of concerns that you raise.
Brian.
I'd just add a little bit of the Vancouver perspective on this. It's certainly a major challenge in Vancouver that our City Council has been involved in for many years and has very strong policy on around mixed income developments. We don't do new large developments without including a 20% low income requirement. Some of our sort of proudest redevelopments are in our poorest neighborhoods. If you ever get to research the Woodwards building, it's one that the city is extremely proud of, where it's a mix of a educational institute, market housing, and low-income housing in one of the most difficult neighborhoods in the city, but one of our most successful projects. But, who's kidding who? We have a long way to go. And the only way we feel we can achieve it is with really strong partnerships with various levels of government to secure sites, with the nonprofits who operate these facilities, et cetera. But the city is investing a lot of effort into trying to get the right mix and not to gentrify our city.
Thank you. We've got one more question up the back.
Yes, me. Thank you. My name is Councillor Alison Clark. I am the councillor at the City of Yarra, next door to Melbourne, and people might, I guess Melbourne people are aware that the City of Melbourne is only one of the municipalities that makes up the greater metropolitan area. My question is for the Lord Mayor. Last year I was the mayor of the neighbouring municipality, and I think we had 2 substantive conversations and a bit of chit-chat at events. I know the former mayor of Whitehorse very well, who's here today, is an advocate of sustainable waste management. I know the mayor of Banyule is here today, he's an advocate for sustainable transport. My own city won the Sustainable City of the Year last year. And I'm just wondering, the City of Melbourne itself is not a member of the Municipal Association of Victoria that every other local government in Victoria is a member of. But my sense is that the rest of us that make up Melbourne have limited engagement with the City of Melbourne that's seen as the figurehead, and I'm hoping that this workshop and this event and the things that encouraging things that have been said will mean that in future there can be additional engagement with those of us who are interested in sustainability beyond the little bit of the City of Melbourne that the council represents, and wondering whether that's going to happen, and if so, how.
To also some of the other panellists on how their cities work with the local governments around them as well. So I'll start with the Lord Mayor, and then maybe some of the others can answer as well.
Thank you, Alison. I'm delighted to be described as a figurehead responsible for a little bit of the city. I accept that gladly. Look, the answer is that sometimes it's informal, and as you know, I've brought together mayors from all the metropolitan areas a couple of times now over my term as Lord Mayor. Not as often as I'd like, and most often when we get together, it's been quite productive discussion around land use planning, and as a result of that, I know many cities inform that work into their municipal strategic statements, as indeed we did. Do I do it often enough? Probably not, is the answer to that. But there are times, and it's really interesting because it goes back to that question of density. One of the difficulties I have is, of course, that mayors change every year in other municipalities, you know, and that makes the continuity a little difficult. That's not an excuse, it's just a reality of our system. One thing, though, that we did do, of which we're very proud, which is, I think, the sort of model you're talking about. Those of you who don't know our city know that, yes, there is the centre of the city, which is probably, it is the economic powerhouse of the whole city, but we have a range of 5 other central activity districts which are very busy metropolises in their own right, and they are suburban in nature, but they are also agglomerations of employment and a lot of activity. So they're like mini cities within the city. Those of you who are locals, you know, think Dandenong or Maribyrnong or Box Hill. They are the central activity districts, and they're actually designated as such. What I did about 2 years ago was get together the mayors and the CEOs, and we talked about this very issue of density. And I kept saying to them, in legal terms, those of you who know it, if you're going to go to equity, you've got to have clean hands. Okay, you can't say, yes, we're all for density. You know, we think it's very important. You know, we think that's the way ahead for our city and prosperity. And then a planning application comes before your committee, and your councillors decide, as they look into the wild and rolling eyes of their complaining constituents, that suddenly they're not so keen on density after all, and they vote down that development in their planning committees. What I got from those mayors and CEOs of the central activity districts was a formal signature on a memorandum of understanding that said that we are in favour of greater density, that we will put policies in place in our cities to make sure that the sort of sensitive development that Jan was talking about before, what we need to do with those developments in the private sector is get to yes on their planning applications. Not for every good idea put 1,000 obstacles in the way. So yeah, you can do it in that way. I work very closely, our Minister for Local Government, Jeanette Powell, is with us this morning, and the Minister does have a ministerial mayors advisory group, which is also a powerful conversation that does those sorts of things as well. And so there are mechanisms there. But if that was an exhortation to do better, agreed, I will do better.
Thank you. Please join with me in thanking Oswaldo, the Lord Mayor Robert Doyle, Amanda, Jan and Brian, and I'd welcome Cathy Oak back up. Thanks.
Thank you, Romilly. Unfortunately, as is the way with these things, we don't have enough time to talk about these great issues in the small amount of time allocated. So it does bring to the close this morning's breakfast. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you to our guest speakers and our panellists. We have given a gift to ourselves. Your gift is a gift to ourselves, in that we will be planting trees in our urban forest on behalf of all of our speakers, and we will be sending photos to prove that we did plant a tree on your behalf. Yes, yes, that's right. I would also like to thank once again our C40 partnerships, our C40 workshop partners: Australian Government, Lend-Lease, Places Victoria, City of Sydney, Green Building Council, World Green Building Council, Eichel, IBM and GBF Suez. As the Lord Mayor of the City said, and in answering that question as well, we look forward to further engaging with all of the stakeholders. Many of you are here today, and in the Eichel hosted session that follows this, we'll be bringing together councils from across Australia to continue the conversation, but also to continue how we will engage in this network further. And speaking of that forum, we do need to reset this room very quickly, so I ask that if you continue your networking conversations in the foyer so that we can do that, that would be great. And finally, to all of the C40 participants, especially those that have travelled far and have spent time in Melbourne, to enjoy the rest of your time here and your workshop tours today, but in particular enjoy the football tonight. It's not for me to say don't barrack for Collingwood, but no, don't, no. But enjoy the rest of your stay, and thank you very much for this morning. Thank you.